Hello, welcome to Rosie's Preserving School. Last one of this term, so that's gone really fast, but we've saved the best for last probably, and we're going to be making jam today. It is a bit of a tricky subject these days because it involves the S word, which is sugar, which most people are trying to shy away from, shall we say. But as we've discussed in previous workshops, sugar is an important preservative. And I did say when we touched on it earlier that I would go through it much more thoroughly when we came to make jam. And that time has come. For making jams, chutneys, preserves of all kinds, you just need sucrose, which is either standard white granulated, which we're using for the jam, or it will be the muscovado, the demerara's, that kind of thing, standard sugar. It's been around since at least the 6th century, used routinely in cooking and baking and preserving. And I tend to think if it was going to make us as ill as people are saying, then it would have happened by now. But I don't think that it makes us ill. It's a product of nature. You can use sugar cane or sugar beet, or beet sugar and cane sugar, I should say, both made from plants. And I tend to use beet sugar, which is made in the UK. If you've got a sugar that is made, local to you, then fine. Or you can buy on price. It doesn't matter as long as it is just sucrose. I don't use artificial sweeteners or artificial sugars, and I'm going to go into that a bit more in a moment. So we've got our sucrose. As I say, when I can get it, I get beet sugar, which is in this country Silver Spoon or Whitworth's, but the beet harvest has come under attack from some sort of blight, and so it's been quite difficult to get hold of. So I just get Tate and Lyle in the end, which is cane sugar, which has to be transported, obviously. And it's pretty much as simple as that. Sugar is such a powerful preservative. It's one of the only ingredients that doesn't have to have a best before date on it. It can last for 25, 30, 40, 50 years, and nothing changes chemically with it. It doesn't spoil, it doesn't grow molds or anything like that. It will just stay as it is, as long as it doesn't get damp. If it gets damp, it will sort of clump together and go quite hard, but its preserving properties are not spoiled. And that's what we need in what we're studying and what we're doing. So please don't try and avoid it. If you can, don't try and lessen the recipe. The recipes that there are, the sugar is there in the right quantity to give the desired result. So if you start taking sugar out of a jam recipe, for instance, you will have a problem then with the set of the jam, and I'll go into that when we actually come to make it. I do understand people's points of view, but personally I'd rather stick with the right amounts. And my view is, any preserve that we make, we don't live off of as a meal. It's part of something, or it's an ingredient. So the actual proportion of sugar that you're actually eating is really quite small. And I don't think there is anybody in history that has become obese from eating a natural sugar, a cane or a beet sugar. That's my viewpoint. I'm not going to argue it with anyone. You're entitled to your viewpoint, and that's fine. I'm just explaining where I'm coming from and what is at the back of all the preserving that we do. The artificial sugars and artificial sweeteners are problematic. I also understand that some people feel that they have to use them, and that again is fine. I'm not arguing with that, but I do have information that I think is quite interesting. We looked at this box of cereal earlier. I'm not sure if it was earlier in this term or whether it was in the time before Christmas. But I'm going to go through it again because I think it's worth reiterating what is going on in the food processing world. And we have typical labelling of a commercial product. I know this isn't jam or anything to do with preserving, but it is very, very clearly demonstrates the problems that we need to be aware of. This is Honey Monster cereal. We're kind of familiar with the Honey Monster. It's called wheat puffs. Wheat puffs with a dash of honey. A dash of honey. Remember that. This company is local to me. This is the only product they produce. They just manufacture one cereal. And I think that indicates for a commercial company to be able to rely on just one product, it must be, you know, put it bluntly, there must be money in it. We have the traffic light system here in the UK, which is red for foods that are high in one thing or another, or possibly several things, usually fats or sugars. And then it goes down to amber and green. And you can see this cereal is nearly all green except for one amber. And the one amber is sugars. And it says it's 7% of the box, which doesn't sound very much. So all very attractive, designed to appeal to children, and you're pushing around in the trolley and they like the character and, you know, nag, 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 can I have this, can I have that? And lovely bees on it. Bees, we like bees, everything's about bees. And on the back is games and more bees, and it says, nothing scary in here. We're not afraid to show our true colours. Not much goes into making our puffs taste so good. It takes only 3 simple steps. We carefully select grains of wheat. We steam the wheat until it puffs. We drizzle the puffs with a dash of sweetness and honey. It's that simple. So, looking at the ingredients, and I always look at the ingredients, and frankly, if there's more than 2 to 3 lines of ingredients, I don't bother reading them. I know that there's far too many chemicals and things in the product. So, you know, it doesn't take as long as you think. But the ingredients in this, which is just wheat steamed and drizzled with a dash of sweetness and honey, is, first off, as you'd expect, puffed wheat is 62%. So just over half of the box is the puff wheat. Now, we all know these boxes are, you know, there's a lot of air room and all the rest of it for whatever reason. The next ingredient, bearing in mind they have to go down in the order of the amount, so you have the most at the beginning and it goes down from there. The next ingredient is glucose syrup. So that's 1 sugar. Then there's sugar. It doesn't say how much glucose syrup there is, but the next ingredient is sugar, and that's 13%. So that's 2. But the front says there's 7% sugar. The third ingredient is the honey, and honey has played a big part in the labelling of honey, drizzled with honey, a dash of honey, honey puffs, all this sort of thing. The honey is 3.6%. That's 3 sugars. Then there's something called soluble glucofiber, and that is a cereal filler. And the cereal filler, the glucofiber, has been processed down, and I can demonstrate it or give you an example. If you were to get a piece of whole wheat bread and you chewed it and chewed it and chewed it and you didn't swallow it for a long time, but you kept chewing, it would eventually taste sweet. So the whole wheat fibre has been processed into another sugar. It is made by Tate and Lyle, and that's what their deal is sugar. So that's a fourth sweetener. Then there's stabilizer, which is calcium carbonate, which is sort of chalk really. There's caramelized sugar, so that's 5. Caramelized sugar syrup, sorry. Sunflower oil, vitamins and minerals. So there's 5 sugars in this box, but the ones that aren't called sugar don't have to be measured as sugar or declared as sugar when they're called something else. So you really have to be careful going through ingredients and being aware of what you're being sold. And it really, really annoys me because who's got time? You know, busy mums and dads going out shopping, the children want this, that and the other, and you're trying to think straight and trying to get around in a certain time. Maybe you've got to pick up from school or you know, after school sports or something. Who's got time to analyse all this lot? And it really annoys me that decoration on the back, we're not afraid to show our true colours. Not much goes into making our puff so good. Really, frankly, I think it's just lies. You know, this was on the television advertised, and the same deal, Honey Monster, it's just wheat with some honey. So I wrote to the Advertising Standards Authority and they wrote back and said there was plenty of information on the box for parents to make an informed decision. So be aware, that's all I'm saying. I'll put that back there. This is my demo box of Honey Monsters, which I keep. So let's go through these sweeteners and different forms of sweeteners. And this is all in processed food. You will never use these sorts of things, with perhaps one exception, in your baking or your preserving. They don't preserve anything. There would be no point. They haven't got any properties for that. Most of them are chemicals. So we've got the glucose fructose syrup, which is a derivative of a waste product, which is corn stalks, basically. And that is fermented with a kind of enzyme, which ends up turning the waste material into another sugar or an artificial sugar. Now, if you think about the whole wheat bread I said to chew and chew and chew and chew, corn stalks are just another cereal fibre. So it's broken down by an enzyme process, which is better than it used to be, because they used to use mercury, and you had mercury traces as well. The net result is you have something that is super, super sweet and very, very plentiful and very, very, very cheap. It helps with food processing, going through all the pipes of the you know, various machinery and that it takes to make processed food. And so it helps on every level. It's a liquid, it's easy to add, you know, trying adding granulated sugar to things that would all clump together, it would get stuck in the silos and the pipes and all the rest of it. This just gets pumped in and goes through and helps whatever is being made. And that can be savoury as well as sweet. If it's used in a savoury setting like pizza or something like that, then as I've said before, you get a whole load of salt put in to counteract it. So you've got a double whammy. And if you remember about the salt we talked about a couple of weeks ago, anti-caking agents, nanoparticles, sticking in the gut, giving you know, all sorts of digestive problems from just salt. Now we're adding in artificial sugars, which have similar issues. Glucose fructose syrup, well, starting off with our cane or beet sugar, it's 50-50 glucose and fructose. Now, glucose is produced by the body. We need glucose, and it's not harmful for us to eat glucose. Fructose, not so much. Fructose is great when it's wrapped around a banana or an apple or something, because you've got a lot of natural fibre there spreading the fructose out. If you're eating it in a more concentrated way, we don't actually really need that, and it's harmful to eat a lot of fructose. So don't buy those little packets of very expensive fructose sugar in the supermarket thinking because it sounds like fruit that it's good for you. It really isn't. But as this form, as in sugar, 50-50, the body can metabolize it. We are programmed for it. It's been around for centuries and centuries, and we can digest it naturally as we digest all of our other food. And as I said right at the beginning, it would be hard to eat so much of it that it would make you obese. It's all the other things that go with it, you know, cakes and all that kind of thing. If you just eat nothing but jam donuts, obviously you're going to put on weight. But in the case of the glucose fructose syrup, which is on pretty much all processed food, on the label, you can look for yourself, you can do your own research, you can look it all up on the internet. I'm just giving you an overview tonight because there's not a huge amount of time. Its actual name is high fructose corn syrup, as in high fructose. So it's got more fructose than glucose. And that means we cannot metabolize it. When we take it in any processed food, it has to be processed by the liver, which turns it into fat. The fat is distributed around the body, around our internal organs, anywhere that it can kind of be disposed of. It cannot be digested. So we don't eat it and it takes its normal, natural path. It stays in the body. It's highly addictive. It interferes with the process of the production of, I think it's an enzyme called leptin, which tells the brain we've had enough to eat, thank you very much. That gets switched off, and it also increases the production of dopamine in the brain, which says, hey, I love this, I want some more. So the natural thing which tells us we're full and we've eaten enough gets switched off, and the dopamine goes into overdrive, with a very unhappy result, as I'm sure you can imagine. One of the other things about this is the corn stalks, all of the sweeteners are produced in one way or another using GMO, a GMO base, so a genetically modified corn, or in the case of some of the other sweeteners, they're using corn or wheat, and they're all GMO. And if mostly, you can get some sweeteners that are organic wheat, but they're very scarce and they're very expensive. And that means that these foods become known as ultra processed. So you've got an unknown situation with the corn that it's produced from, and then it goes into pretty much all processed foods, makes it addictive, which means that you eat something, and I'll have an illustration of that later. You eat something and you finish it and you think, oh, I could do with some more of that, or I could eat that, it tasted lovely. It's all to do with mouthfeel, it's all to do with sweetness, and you know, ticks all the boxes. The thing is, eventually the liver gives up, because it cannot, if you keep on eating the food and drinking the soda drinks, above all of the colas and all of that kind of thing, they don't, when they say they've got, you know, this much sugar in them, they're not putting granulated sugar in. They couldn't process it, they couldn't mix it. It's the liquid sweeteners that they're using. And all the zero ones and that kind of thing have got actual artificial sweeteners. They haven't got so much of the glucose, fructose, sugar. They've got artificial sweeteners. So whichever way you look at it, all of this stuff is not good for you. If you think about the nanoparticles, the nano particles of salt, which were wrecking people's digestive systems, and then you've got all this laid on top, and who knows what other ingredient, like stabilizers, emulsifiers, you know, all those kinds of things that are all produced synthetically. You don't get any natural anything, because they need to produce quickly, cheaply, And above all, it needs to be consistent. And you can only get that by mixing a cocktail of carefully weighed chemicals. And personally, that's not, you know, what I want to have in my body. However, it's hard to avoid. I've got some notes because, you know, I don't have auto cue or anything, and there's only so much I can remember at one time. We'll go on to some of these other things, which have, to some extent, come to the fore more than the glucose fructose. People have got used to that being in their food, and they, oh yeah, well, it's, you know, that's what it is. Most diet foods have got it in, by the way, and low calorie foods, because it makes them addictive. And it means, you know, if you go on to sort of Weight Watchers or something like that, they've all got glucose fructose in because it makes you think, oh yes, I'll get that, that tasted nice. And, you know, you've got the dopamine, you've got the leptin switched off, and, you know, the diet foods actually don't make you thin. You know, it's just a fallacy, really. And I always remember Joan Collins being asked why she didn't drink Diet Coke, and she said, because I don't see anyone thin drinking it, you know. So there you go. So what we've got here is some of the natural, not natural, artificial sweeteners and sugars. Again, you have to be careful of the wording. So if we think about aspartame, it was the first real artificial sweetener that was in everything. That it was just, again, cheap, but it had terrible effects on people. It produces anxiety, depression, short-term memory loss, weight gain, fatigue. These days it's been changed. The name, it's been tweaked a little bit, and the name has been changed to sucralose, which is very, very close to sucrose. And O's on the end of things just means a sugar. So you think, oh, sucralose, oh, that sounds all right. You know, I know what that is. So this is sucralose. I haven't got it's only a white powder. And that is used in combination now with the other sweeteners because they are deemed not to be sweet enough. So although they have other properties, they add in this sucralose to make them sweeter. So you're still getting an aspartame type sweetener. It's hard to avoid again. So we start with erythritol, which is here, which actually was discovered in Scotland in 1848, unbelievably. It's very low in calories. It's the lowest of the sweeteners. It tastes like sugar, and it can be found in fruits and so on. So they put on there 100% natural. Again, it's produced by fermenting, a yeast fermenting glucose from corn or wheat starch. Again, the GMO problem, the ultra processing. Erythritol, you'll see all the ones with ol on the end are sugar alcohols. And that doesn't mean that they have ethanol in them and that they have some sort of alcoholic effect on you. It just means that they produced in this way with this fermenting the corn stalks with the yeast, or it must be a natural yeast that is found. So it's 70% as sweet as sugar, and 5% of the calories can't be digested, and it just passes straight through without changing. When it reaches the colon, and then the gut bacteria causes fermentation. Again, it can't be digested, but the gut bacteria get hold of it, and everything starts fermenting, which just produces gas and digestive upsets. 90% of it passes from there into the bloodstream, and the rest is excreted in urine, and nothing has been changed with it, which is why it's so popular in diet things, and for people, for diabetics and people who really do need to reduce their weight, because they can eat sweet things, but it doesn't actually stay in their body at all. The problems are that it causes diarrhea, it causes nausea in susceptible people. It's mainly well tolerated, and it doesn't spike the blood sugar or insulin, which is why it's very good for diabetics and people like that. Good for dental health because it doesn't cause any tooth decay, and it's good for baking. However, in the trials and in the development of erythritol into a food additive, they found that it also was very good at killing flies. So it's also used as a fly killer, which I find extraordinary, that something that is in masses of our food is also good for killing flies and used as an insecticide. The reason it kills flies is because it damages the larvae. It doesn't kill the fly, it kills the potential larvae carried by the fly. So it interferes with its reproduction system, basically, and causes infertility and that kind of thing. Now, I don't think it's much of a stretch to think, well, what's it doing to us? But there's sort of silence on that subject. But certainly I've looked at some of the infertility sites, and they recommend that people keep away from artificial sugars and artificial sweeteners. And that's as far as they'll go. The trouble is the food industry is so powerful that they will immediately squash anything that is going to, you know, rock the boat. So that's erythritol, and it is combined with sucralose, or what was aspartame in many cases. Then we've got xylitol, another sugar alcohol, and there are others. There's sorbitol. Sorbitol is only 60% as sweet as sugar, but it has 60% of the calories of sugar, but that definitely does cause diarrhea. Sorbitol. Xylitol, used in a lot in chewing gum, mints, oral care products, especially in things like sauces, like ketchups and barbecue sauce and that kind of thing. You can cook with them. You can cook with both of these, replace sugar in recipes. And, you know, if you have to watch your sugar intake because of diabetes, then, you know, that's going to be something that is useful. However, I'm not sure which way round this goes, whether the sugars cause the diabetes, the artificial sugars, or whether they're solving the problem. I'm not at all sure. Xylitol is very, very popular in food processing, but you have to be so careful with it because it will kill your dog. If a dog eats food with xylitol in it, it causes massive organ failure within 15 to 20 minutes. So you can imagine, you know, you've got a nice barbecue going on, everybody's out in the garden, you've got your ketchup with the xylitol in it, and the dog's sort of wandering around snaffling people's beef burgers off of their plate. You can't, how can you watch a dog all of the time and make sure that it doesn't eat something that's got this product in? And people think I'm being alarmist and everything, but our local vet every summer goes round delivering in every household a leaflet warning against this, because by the time you realise the dog is ill, you haven't got time to get to the vet with it, and by the time you get there, it's too late anyway. So be very, very careful. And again, if it does it to a dog, I don't want to eat it. I'm sorry, diabetic or not, I would find another way. So the dental care one, which is xylitol. Here we have, I think this is just disgraceful. We've got Colgate baby toothpaste. I know this isn't preserving, but it is all indicative of what's going on. We've got Colgate baby toothpaste, 0 to 2 years. Well, you know, I've had 2 children. I had a toothbrush for them, and I used to just gently rub their gums with it. I never thought to put any toothpaste on it, but here we are. So you brush your children's teeth twice a day. It contains sodium fluoride as the main ingredient, which is another huge problem, which I won't go into now. It's got sorbitol in it. Sorbitol. Oh, what does sorbitol do? It causes diarrhea. Who wants a baby with diarrhea? It's got water in it next. So it's got sorbitol, water, hydrated silica, which is like we put in the sachets, isn't it? In the dehydrated things. It's got an aroma, cellulose gum, sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium saccharin, another old-fashioned sweetener, and sodium fluoride and something else I can't pronounce. It says on the box, do not allow your child to swallow it. You know, it's not safe for them to swallow. And I just find it extraordinary that these things in this day and age are on sale and nobody seems to care. You know, it's fine. Maybe it's just me. We've got a couple of other things here. Now I've got agave nectar, which people go mad over. And here in this country, this is the one product that Trading Standards would like to remove from sale. This one says, because I bought it in a health food shop, that it's a sweetener from the finest blue agave plant, great in hot drinks and cereals. And it says on the back that's all it's got in it, pretty much. So maybe that's right, but there are an awful lot of these on supermarket shelves, costing next to nothing, which have never been near an agave plant. And these go up to about 70 plus fructose in them, which, as I've said, you don't want to be taking in, you know, huge amounts of fructose. So that's not a great one. And they're always labeled to look healthy and fabulous. And so you need to be very, very careful what you're buying and how you're using it. Similarly with stevia. Now, I know some of you probably live near places where stevia is grown. This is called stevia sweetener, best replacement for sugar and artificial sweeteners. As I've said before, stevia is fine if you buy it in a health food shop and it is stevia leaf extract. That's like buying an essential oil. And so you are actually buying an oil from the leaf of the plant. Most of these are just, again, chemically made to mimic stevia. They're added in widely to processed foods and can be quite damaging. And, you know, you've got to be careful again about buying things like that. The thing I wanted to finish off with is something that I've only read yesterday, and some of you will have heard of this chap. He's a doctor in this country. He's one of a twin, and he's called Chris Van Tuliken. Now he is an infectious diseases doctor, but for some reason he got involved in doing a trial on ultra processed foods. Now go back to the beginning. These are foods produced by fermenting things with GMO cereals to produce artificial sugars and sweeteners. So they are, and then when they're used as an ingredient in our food, that gives the food the title of an ultra processed food, a UPF. So Chris Van Tuliken last October went on a month's diet of ultra processed foods. He ate 80% of his food was ultra processed. So things like chicken nuggets, pizza, frozen lasagna, all that kind of thing, all the convenience foods, nothing extreme. He just, things he'd not eaten before. Before he went into the trial, obviously he was weighed, he was measured, and he had an MRI on his brain, a brain scan, all sorts of tests were done and everything else. And he ate these foods for 1 month. They found that, well, over the month, he gained 6.5 kilos in weight. And he was only eating with his family, you know. But what he found was, the biggest thing was, he couldn't stop eating the food. When he'd finished, he wanted more. He was getting up in the middle of the night and coming down, raiding the fridge for other things that were there. And he said that it produced anxiety, and he was very stressed. He couldn't sleep. He was very constipated. And all in all, he felt pretty low. But what they found is, by doing an MRI at the end of the month, that there were new connections in his brain. And the connections went from the cerebellum, which is the repetitive automatic behavior part of the brain, to the reward center, which is at the front of the brain. And there were lots of new connections, which meant that because of the reward part of it, he kept wanting to repeat all this behavior, and he was having a problem when the trial stopped in stopping that. So he had this MRI, and they found all these new connections, and they also did some analysis, and they said only 26% of the modern diet is homemade food. So children, everybody in the family is all eating, 70% processed or fast food or drinks and that kind of thing, ultra processed food. He's just had another MRI, because the program that this is for is being shown on May the 27th on our BBC One channel at 9 p.m, which is entitled, "What Are We Feeding Our Kids?" And he's just had another MRI in preparation for the program, and those new connections are still there. So the trial ended at the end of November, and he's going to go on having MRIs to see if they ever diminish. But his and the scientists' thoughts are that those connections are there for good, and he is going to now have to learn to live with going back to his ordinary diet. He hasn't lost the weight yet. He can't get the weight off, and he's got to learn to cope, to not respond to those triggers of, I want to eat this, I want to eat that. And it only takes small amounts of these chemicals to change our bodies and change our response to things and change our health. So when people, I'm just giving you sort of ammunition, because people, if you make jam and so on with lots, and what people think is lots of sugar, you will get attacked for it, like I do, day in, day out. Oh, that sugar, oh, that sugar. But really, the alternative, that the chemicals that we're adding into our foods to mistakenly take out natural sugar are doing us far more harm, and it's all getting quite difficult really to control, I think, the health of most Western populations. So try and avoid them in what you buy to eat, and certainly don't use them in your preserving. And I'm going to set you some homework for the 4 weeks before the summer term. And those of you that haven't read this book by Joanna Blythman yet should, because it will set out why it is so important to make your own food, know what goes into it, know where it's come from, and the preserving all comes into that, because you've got things there that you can use which stop you reaching for the menu and the phone to order in a takeaway, because all those kinds of things that stress us out, we must get a meal and just phone up and get it delivered. Those are the danger areas, and as he's demonstrated, in 1 month his whole physiology in his body has changed, and probably for good, and he's only 42, I think, and he's sort of feeling pretty depressed about it all. So this book goes into all that's in our food, and some of the things, like in some instances, things like chicken nuggets, there isn't any food. It is all chemicals, which is pretty gross, really. So Trevor will probably put that up later. I'm going to move on to the jam now. You're probably thinking, is she ever going to start the jam? But I do think it's important to take these things on board and make the right decisions. Anyway, jam is relatively easy to make, and people have all sorts of misconceptions and they have all sorts of problems with it. But basically, it's just fruit and sugar. So I'm going to turn my pan on. I have plugged it in, yeah. And I've got my blackcurrants in here. The main thing is to have equal sugar to fruit. Now, the blackcurrants were frozen, and I had a bag of 1.5 kilos of fruit. So that's what's in the pan. So I have got here 1.5 kilos of ordinary granulated sugar. If you only want to make a jar for yourself, then just do 500 grams of each, or even less. You can just do it in a small pan, make a small amount if you just fancy the odd jar of jam. Most people tend to make it quite a big pan, but if it's just you and you just fancy some jam, then just do that. It's really easy to kind of adjust. You can have more fruit, but if you're a beginner, you need to start with the pan about 1/3 full of fruit and no more, because as you will see, it's going to bubble up, it's going to, get quite violent. So you want a nice big pan and plenty of room. Don't do like I do, fill it quite a way up, and then you've got to stand by it in case it all boils over. You want to give yourself a chance if you, if you're making it for the first time. Now, to make great jam, you need 4-5 things, really. You need very, very fresh fruit. And I get very, very fresh fruit by using frozen fruit, mainly because of where I live. If I tried to go out to get fruit from a farm or something like that, I would have to travel miles, and I'd do nothing else but go out and find fruit. So I have frozen fruit delivered, and frozen fruit is ideal because it's nearly always frozen on the farm, or at least chilled. It's picked, chilled, and then taken to be frozen. And they blast freeze it. It's not like putting it in your freezer at home. I use a frozen fruit company that grows their own fruit in this country, and those black currants in there are the same black currants that end up in Ribena, as they grow for them as well. They do all sorts of other frozen fruits, and they also do frozen Seville oranges, which obviously aren't grown in this country, but they do stock them. They're in our magazine. If you ever need to get anything, they don't sell in huge, great boxes. You can buy just 1 or 2 kilos, depending what it is. And they've got a great range of British fruit, and it's all organic. They source it so that it's organic. So you want very, very fresh fruit. And the reason you want very, very fresh fruit is because you want the highest level of something called pectin. And everybody says, oh, it's got low pectin, or it's got high pectin, and it was years before I knew what pectin was. You just bandy these things around, and it turns out that pectin is a starch. And we all know starches from making things like using sausage, when you use a flour and butter to make a roux or something. The starch, when it's heated, sort of bursts and thickens things. So you do need fruit to have the most pectin it can have. And it has the most pectin just before it's ready to be picked. So if you're picking fruit at a fruit farm, then go and pick your fruit, but pick some a bit underripe as well, and that will give you the highest level of pectin and will really make it easy to get the jam to set. Which is why I like frozen fruit, because it's frozen and it's sort of suspended until I can do something with it. If you've gone to your fruit farm or wherever and you've picked fruit and you get home and all of a sudden you can't make the jam right there and then, either freeze the fruit or cook the fruit like I'm doing now, and before you put the sugar in, cool it down and chill it, and then when you've got time to do it, you can go back to it and carry on from that point. So you've got your fresh fruit with the pectin, you need the sugar, you need equal amounts of sugar to fruit, as I've said. And making jam's a bit like a chemical experiment, really. It's not much like cooking, because you need all these things in place for the experiment to work. And if one of them isn't right, that's when you get into a bit of a problem. And by knowing what you need, you can kind of eliminate what's going on. So you need your sugar, you need acid, you need enough acid to go into the chemical reaction with the sugar and the pectin. Now, if you're a beginner, I would say use the juice of a lemon per kilo of fruit. End of. Always do that. Once you get a bit more experience, you can think, well, would it have enough acid? Maybe it'll be all right. Think you get to know what the low acid fruits are. Things like blueberries, cherries, that kind of thing. Peaches, nectarines. They're not great for making a set jam. You will make a kind of more or less like a compote, really. So I've got my lemon here and I'm going to add that in. I'm going to turn that up a bit now. It's sort of, once the juices start to run, you can increase the heat. You don't want it very high to start with because your fruit will just stick to the pan. But you can add your lemon juice in. I've got my squeezer. I haven't taken the zest off because I don't need it for anything else. So I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to add it into my vinegar jar that we've all gone through afterwards, and to make my lemon vinegar. So I'm going to pour the that lemon juice in. I've got a pip there I want to get out of the way. And I'll do the other one. Yeah, and that goes in. Stir it in. You can see it's quite liquid. I'm going to get these out of the way so that we don't cloth. I've got my jars ready. They should be washed and rinsed and put in a warm oven. It's not essential to put them in the warm oven for the heat, but it dries them off and they're nice and dry, because you don't want any moisture in the jar before you jar up the jam. As we know, we're trying to drive off moisture here, and that's the last thing you need making jam. You need heat, and you need enough of it. And people are very fond of sort of having nearly enough heat, but not quite. And that's why they can't get to the set. And the thing is, if you keep cooking it and cooking it and cooking it till it's like jam in the pan, you're actually just evaporating moisture and you're ending up with a sort of fruity glue, really. And that isn't jam. Jam should be set. It should be in the legal term as a gel consistency. If you're making jam to sell, to call it jam, it must be fruit in a gel consistency. So it's starting to bubble now and heat up thoroughly, and the juices are running, and the fruit doesn't take much cooking. It's all smelling lovely and blackcurranty. I've got a saucer here, which is to test the set at the end. So you need to get that ready. I don't put it in the fridge, because if you take it out of the fridge and put hot jam on it, you will create condensation and you won't be able to do a test like that. It's better to have the saucer at room temperature, put your jam on, and then put it in the fridge if you want to test that it's going to set. So what I'm going to do now, because they're nice and cooked down, and you can do any mixture of berries. You might have a few bags of odd berries in your freezer from last year. Just put them all in the pan together, as long as you know the starting weight. You can do mixed autumn fruits, you can do single varieties, you can do plums, whatever you like. This is the method. So well, I'll tell you about strawberries in a minute when we're waiting for this to cook. So I'm going to take this off the heat. This is what you will do, is take the pan off the heat, and you're going to add the sugar. You don't need to dribble it all in and, you know, grain by grain, just tip it all in. You don't need to heat it up in an oven or anything like that. And then you're going to stir it in. And what we said before, you need to stir it until it's as dissolved as you can get it off of the heat. If I did all that on the heat, the danger is that the sugar would go to the bottom of the pan and cook onto the pan before I'd had a chance to stir it in. And if I stop talking, you can again hear the sugar. I can feel it and I can hear it. But by putting the sugar in, you can already see that it's very, very glossy. The sugar gives a lovely shine to things. I don't use the unrefined sugar for that reason, because it tends to give a very dull, because it's brown to start with, and it just makes it look very dull. And you don't want to use anything like muscovado, because it's too wet. The jam won't set. Muscovados, sugars and things like that are for chutneys, really. So you stir it and you dissolve as much as you can, but now it's safe to put it back on the hob. And you stir it until it's dissolved. Could you find the timer for me, please? Get it.
6?
Yeah. I don't need it timed, yeah.
No, you're 6.
So you keep stirring, keep stirring, keep stirring until it's all smooth. You can't feel the sugar. Pay special attention to where the pan bends. If you're using a big saucepan rather than a preserving pan, then just be very, very careful to make sure you get everything stirred nicely. You can still feel some sugar. Making my arm ache. As I said before, if you don't get all the sugar dissolved, when you put it away in the cupboard and store it, sugar crystals, they're all sugar crystals, and crystals grow. That's what they do. And they will multiply, and you will get sort of little clusters of crunchy jam, which isn't harmful, but it's not particularly pleasant on your toast. And so it's not great. You need to get the sugar dissolved before you start timing for the set. I can't hear anything other than the pan starting to heat up and boil. So you've already doubled the amount by volume in the pan by adding the sugar. So you can see why it's important not to put too much fruit in. And really, it is so fast to make. It's better to do 2 batches than one big one, which you have difficulty controlling. So I'm going to turn that down slightly because black currants have the habit of sticking to the pan like mad if you're not careful. But now the sugar is stirred in, and I'm not going to stir it again. Once it comes up to the boil, I'll start timing. Smells amazing. Have you got the timer, Chef, please? Thank you. So I've got my timer here set for 6 minutes, and that is how long it should take to get the jam to set under ordinary circumstances. So if you're still there 25 minutes later, there's something else wrong in those sets of conditions I said about the pectin, the acid, the sugar, the heat, and the fresh fruit. You have to analyze what it is that might be wrong and try and rectify it. But with beginners, it's nearly always either not enough heat or not enough acid. So add the juice of another lemon and reboil it and see how you go. And it's just starting to boil. So I'm going to press my timer. And I'm going to tell you about strawberry jam now, and why I said it's not good to start with strawberry jam. And you don't want to keep stirring it, by the way, because that cools it down. You can stir just to check that it's not sticking, but I'll do that in a minute. I'm not going to keep on doing it. But if it starts rising up the pan, turn the heat down slightly and just give it a bit of a stir to get it to calm down before it boils over, because you just absolutely don't want jam or anything that's boiled over. I can honestly say in the years I've been making jam, it's only happened to me about twice, and that is because you get distracted. But 6 minutes is not long to stand beside something to make sure that it stays good. Now, strawberries are not great these days unless you grow them yourself, or you can pick them yourself and pick and choose literally which strawberries you're going to pick. The problem being that the growers have hybridized them and kept on crossing them with other varieties and all the rest of it to grow the great big strawberries that we have in the supermarkets and the markets, which are for pavlovas and lovely summer desserts and all the rest of it, or dipping in chocolate, but they're full of water. They've been grown. A fruit will only have so much acid and so much pectin, and they've been pumped up. And trying to get rid of that water enough to then add the sugar and make the jam, there's not enough tartness to it, and you're cooking them too long before you can add the sugar, trying to get rid of the water. Because when I was young, strawberries had to be prepared hours before you wanted to eat them, because they were so tart, they had to be sliced and sugar sprinkled on them and left to soak. You know, you couldn't just pick them up and eat them, rarely. And you also had things called jam strawberries. So strawberries were grown in the ground in a field, and not in vermiculite in a bed that's sort of waist height for picking. And all the crop that could be sold as strawberries would be picked, and then you could go and pick jam strawberries, which were all the smaller ones. You know, they were ideal for making jam, and they made very good jam. But it's now, if you make strawberry jam, it's so sweet because the fruit is sweet and it's not acidic enough. I'm just going to give it one stir now, and this is what's called the rolling boil. People talk about the rolling boil, and that is because it's all bubbling up and turning over, and bubbling up and turning over, and that's what you want to see, uniform across the top of the pan. just 3 minutes to go. I'm going to turn it down because blackcurrant spits everywhere if you're not careful. And you just want to maintain that boil. You don't want to lose your nerve and think, oh, it's boiling, I better turn it down. I mean, I've turned it down 1 because I know that 6 is too hot for it. But it will be different atmospheric conditions, different, you've got a wet day, or, you know, you just have to watch it. But this is kind of an ideal rolling boil. Some jams will form a thick foam on the top, and that is from the sugar. You don't need to do anything about it. You don't need to be skimming it off. This has got foam on it, but you can't see it very well because it's purple. But some, especially stone fruits like plums and green gages and things like that, apricots will have lots and lots of foam, but just leave it. And then at the end, you can just stir it back. Right at the end, when you're waiting to test for the set, you can just stir that back in. You don't need to skim it off and put it in the bin. It's just sugar. So in Rosie's world, we call it foam. We don't call it scum, which a lot of people do, because there's nothing nasty about it. All you've got in the pan is fruit and sugar, so there can't be anything nasty. So so that's bubbling nicely. And this is what I mean by the figure of 8. Just go round, check the pan. Plums are a devil for sticking to the pan. So when the autumn comes, you know, be careful. Just go have a drink. Well, just watching. No questions yet. That's good. And you can see, you know, it looks more jammy than it did, but it's not going to be thick like jam is when you spread it on your toast. So Tracy's asked, if you're using fresh fruit, should you wash it first? All depends, Tracy, where it's come from, how dirty it is, if it's got bugs on it. You could, it's best not to if you can avoid it. But if you have to, rinse it and drain it really, really well. But you don't add water to the pan. You don't want to be adding water in. So there's no measurement of water for this. You cook the fruit very, very slowly to break it down and then add the other things. Right, I'll tell you about the sugar in a minute, the jam sugars and so on. So there's my timer going off. So I'm going to switch that off. I've got my heat mat here. I'm just going to check it again. And I've got everything ready. So I'll turn that off for the moment and we'll see if it's going to set. Lift that down. It calms right down immediately, and you can see in the middle the sort of jamminess of it, but it's very liquid. It's not thick. It shouldn't be thick. So I'm going to put a little bit on my saucer there, and I'm going to put that in the fridge, or I'll need to put it in the fridge out here because the other one's blocked by the camera. And I'm going to stir in the foam while I've got a minute. You can see it on the top there. The bit round, you can see it's a different sort of look to the glossy bit in the middle. What you don't want is any foam that's cooked onto the side of the pan up here, because that's cooked and it will just stay there in lumps, which isn't great. So you just want to stir this quite vigorously. So who's that? Brenda's asked if I put butter in. You can do if you're eating it yourself. I don't, because I sell my jam and I don't want people telling me they've got dairy issues and why has it got butter in. I would have to put as an ingredient, and it would have to be labelled as an allergen because it's got milk in it. And I don't want to put things in that are allergens really if I can avoid it. So you can see there it's become sort of uniformly glossy and all that dull foam has disappeared. Elizabeth saying, did I put the plate in the fridge or the freezer? I just put it in the fridge, Elizabeth, mainly because my freezer's jam-packed full. I don't think I could get a saucer in there as well. And it's probably a bit vicious, really, to put in. But now then, so Katie's saying, so you make sure the fruit is soft before adding the sugar. Absolutely. Sugar kind of halts the cooking down, so that's especially important in things like chutneys. You know, when you want apples and onions and things like that to cook down, you don't want to put the sugar in right at the beginning. Same with the fruit, really. You know, you need it to get soft, you need the juices to be running before you add the sugar, and then when you add the sugar liquefies, so you end up, everything gets a lot more liquid. You will notice, and again that's true of chutneys as well as jam. Somebody asked about jam sugar. I don't teach using jam sugar because I want people to not have any barriers, so I don't want them to think, oh, we've been out for the day, I'd love to make a bit of jam with, and we pick some fruit or some blackberries or whatever. Oh, I haven't got any jam sugar, so I can't make it. People didn't have jam sugar years ago, and they manipulated their ingredients naturally. So blackberries get cooking apples added to make blackberry and apple jam because apples have lots of pectin, cooking apples, blackberries don't, and you make these marriages. Jam sugar has pectin added. You can use it if you want to. I think the only time I've ever used it is for strawberry jam, modern strawberry jam. It still didn't set very well. You can add your powdered pectin that you can buy to sugar. You can add it in yourself and stir it through, and you don't want to add it into the jam straight because it will clump and form lumps. You add it to the sugar. I've tried that with strawberries. It's not great, but as long as you accept it's going to run off your toast and you're going to lick your fingers, it tastes all right. But you know, but jam sugar has got pectin added, and it's a different way of making. You tend to put everything in the pan together, heat it up for a set amount of time, and then jar it up. And you need to follow the instructions on your on the packet, because it's not making it like this. But my main gripe about it is it's expensive compared to just buying a 50p bag of sugar. So that's why I don't teach it, because I don't want people to get the idea that preserving isn't for them because they've got to have all these special things that they haven't got. If you want to use preserving sugar, if you're going in for competitions and things like that, if that's your thing, then preserving sugar is much bigger crystals, and it dissolves quicker and it stays very bright. It gives a very bright finish to the jam, which is always good for judges and things like that. But I've said before, I hate the word judge. I like to encourage people, and I like them to just sort of get going and make things with what they've got, not feel they've got to have anything special. But preserving sugar is there if you want, if you know, an experienced jam maker and you want to enter competitions, then by all means invest in some bags of that, which again is even more expensive if you can get it, and you know, see how you go. As I said, I avoid the other sugars. I think you can use there's coconut sugar now. It's no better for you. It hasn't got different calories. It's it just does the same thing, and I think you can use it in jam. I haven't done it, so I'm not going to recommend it, but you know, these things are there. And for the girls that are in Brazil or in America, you've probably got different things, you know, that they're called different things, and you know, but I don't know what they are, so you'll have to sort of make your own adjustments. I don't think there's any other questions there. Brenda said, no, I'm not happy with powdered pectin, Brenda. It's a bit of a, I sell it because people want it. People who are artisan, bigger makers, you know, they're making vats of jam and they want the powdered pectin. So I do sell it. I've tried using it, but I'm not a big fan, you know, really. I'd rather, for the jam that I'm going to use, I put up with how it is. You know, if it's a bit runny, if it's a bit solid, it doesn't really matter. Don't throw it away. The only thing you've got to throw away is something you've burnt. You won't ever be able to just take the bit off the top and the rest is burnt, you know, because it will all taste burnt. And that's the only time I will allow you to throw it away. Other than that, it's always got a use. You know, if it's really solid, then call it a fruit cheese or something and eat it with sliced. You can put it in puddings, you can put it on your porridge. If it's too runny, use it as a sauce, or make some more and add that in and try and sort of even it up with something else, or put some, like I said, make a marriage with something that's got lots of pectin, like cooking apples. Cooking apples are the absolute saviour of the jam maker because they don't have a flavour of their own. Nobody makes apple jam because it doesn't taste of anything, funnily enough, even though apples do. The jam doesn't. So you add it into other things. And I often add it into strawberry jam, actually, to give it a bit more oomph, you know, to get it to set. Anyway, I'm going to recover my saucer. Leave it in there for 2 or 3 minutes. And then you're just trying to replicate what's going to happen in the jar. And I don't know what's going to happen, whether it will be set or not. But the way to tell is you don't want to keep poking it and everything. You just put it on the saucer, put it in the fridge and leave it. And then you use your finger like a little snow plow and you push it away from you. And it all crinkles up. That is what's going to happen to the whole pan when it cools down. And you can see it actually in the pan. I'm going to have to lick my finger now. If I use my spoon and I just draw it across the top, you can see it crinkling up there as well. And even though it's blisteringly hot, it's still setting right on the top. So, oh right, sorry. I thought you wanted me to do another test. Really? So even it up as you jar it up to make sure the bit at the bottom doesn't become a different consistency. I'll take my spoon out and just jar up. I'm going to go through the jarring up again. I know we're getting close to time. I've got my jars here, got my funnel. Invest in one of those if you haven't got one. It will save you a lot of washing up and jar washing and everything else. And you fill the jar by looking down the funnel. You can get on and jar up straight away. You don't need to wait or anything like that. And you keep filling the jar, looking down your funnel until the jam appears at the top where the spout meets the cup of the funnel. I just put a little bit more in. Be careful with hexagonal or square jars because they've got shoulders and sometimes you get an air pocket, which is why I don't like them. but because it's just a fag having to keep on checking them. But when you take the funnel out, you will see that the jar is filled right to the top, which is how we want it. You put the lid on straight away, and as the jar cools, the whole jar cools, the jam will shrink back down in the jar. It will leave a vacuum at the top, which will pull that lid down tight onto the rim of the jar and create a vacuum seal, which means nothing can get in, nothing can get out, and you can do like I've been doing this week and eat 12-year-old marmalade with no problem at all. Same goes for jam, same goes for chutney. That's how you fill the jar correctly with this type of lid. And you don't need to do anything else to it. You don't need to water bath it or anything like that. It will keep perfectly well. When you open it, there'll probably be a nice satisfying pop. If there isn't, don't panic and think that it's gone off. It just, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The jar, who's that? Tracy, yeah. The big thing is that the jars don't have to be warm, but they have to be dry. I'd rather have dry, cold jars than warm, wet jars. Ideally, you have warm, dry jars, but if you can't manage that, and I'm often demonstrating in a field, in a marquee or something, you can't manage the warm bit, just make sure you've got the dry bit, because we know that the enemy of all preserves is moisture, and you don't want any moisture in the jar. And for that reason, you don't want wax discs either. With these type of lids, they go on, that's it. You don't want a wax disc on the top, because moisture will get underneath that and collect there, condensation as it cools. And you don't want that to happen, because it will allow mold to grow. Wax discs are for cellophane covers. Cellophane is porous. And when that's all we had, you put the wax disc on, you put the cellophane cover on and hoped for the best. And it's just a moisture barrier, another aid to stop the moisture getting in or out. But in truth, what happened was you'd put it away, you know, over the winter. We didn't live in centrally heated houses then. Houses were damp, moisture would get through the cellophane, through the wax disc, and it would all grow mold on the top. As we always joke about, you know, when we were young, you had mold on the jam. It was an everyday occurrence. But now it's not desirable, and it's not healthy really to be eating random mold. So you want it to stay nice, tasting nice, looking nice, and staying the right consistency. So when you open that, whenever you open it, it will be like you want it to be. So it's been quite a full evening. I hope you've learned a lot, and that you will apply a lot of that, and that it will help you turn out a good jam every time. And there's no reason why you shouldn't. But if it doesn't gel the first time, examine the steps and think, try more lemon juice, try a hotter heat if you feel that you haven't heated it hot enough for long enough, and just do it again. But if you do it twice and it still won't set, I wouldn't keep trying, because you will end up with that gluey, thick, you know, that you can't do anything with really. Better to live with what you've got and use it accordingly than, you know, keep on boiling and boiling and boiling, because it won't taste of anything anyway. Okay, I will see you in 4 weeks' time, hopefully. Probably 5 weeks if I can't remember the date. Anyway, you've got all the details. I did want to show you, I don't know if Trev's put it on the screen. I told you I was getting the Complete Idiot's Guide to Dehydrating Foods. It did come, And I have to say, it's one of the best books I've seen for dehydrating. So if you were interested in that, this book is really good and it's got some great ideas in it. So I haven't tried any of them yet because I haven't had time, but I will be doing, and they'll appear in the magazine as we go along. The new magazine is up now if you wanted to read it, which you can read for free online at Love Jars. You can turn the pages in the software. Brenda's just said you don't like hexagonal jars. They're very pretty and I like giving them as presents. What would you suggest instead? By all means, if you like them, Brenda, use them. It's just me. I don't like things with corners because I'm making lots all the time and trying to get it on sale. I find it fiddly to get the air out of all those little corners, and then you can't get the jam back out again once it's in there. I just prefer a round jar and a straighter jar if I possibly can, and I tend to use the Bonta shape because they're a nice modern looking jar, but they're straight sided and you don't have all that fiddling trying to because I have to have a range of jars as well, a range of sizes. So if you've got a little hexagonal, 40 ml hexagonal, that's even worse, trying to get everything into there, and it takes such a long time. That's the only reason. I grant you they look nice, but you choose whatever you want to use. That's just my opinion. Okay, do I ever turn the jars upside down? No, I don't. Not really. The only time I do that is if I'm making herb jellies and all the herbs have gone to the top or the bottom. But other than that, I don't do that. You can, people do, but then it just makes a mess on the inside of your lid, really. Any tips for a half full jar? Just eat it. Eat it first, Rachel. Okay, thank you for joining in, and I'll see you in the summer term.